Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare. Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivakacharya Astradhara Satasisi Mad Abhay Charnar Vindabhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada ki jai. Sisi Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinata Shyamakunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhana ki jai. Shivindavandam ki jai. Simayapur Dham ki jai. Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai. Tulasi Devi Bhakti Devi ki jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Sri Harinam Sankirtani ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu. He is the ocean of transcendental mercy, and although the subject matter of Bhakti Yoga is very confidential, he has nonetheless manifested it so nicely that even in this age of Kali, the age of quarrel, all glories to Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This is reading from Caitanya Caritamrita, Adi Lila, Canto, I guess, 17, verses 250 to 253. Is that what that says up there? Yeah, I got it right. Okay. Suni Prabhu Krodhe Kaila Krishna Dosogara Tangalana Utila Prabhu Paduya Maribara. Suni Prabhu Krodha Kaila. What? Can't see it. 250? Is it 251? But he told me you didn't do when you gave class, you didn't do 250, so Doxa said, can you do 250? But anyway, it's okay. I will recite it, then we can together do the 51. He said you skipped that one yesterday. Suni Prabhu Krodha Kaila Krishna Dasotgara Tengalana Dutila Prabhu Paduya Maribara. Okay, let me read this, and then we'll go to 251, right? Because that's written on the board, 251? Right, okay. Anyway, let me read the translation. Hearing the foolish student, the Lord became greatly angry and rebuked Lord Krishna in various ways. Taking up a stick, he rose to strike the student. Purport. It is mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam that when Uddhava came from Lord Krishna with a message for the gopis, All the gopis, especially Srimati Radharani, denounced Krishna in various ways. Such denunciations, however, reflect an exuberant loving attitude that an ordinary man cannot understand. When the foolish student questioned Lord Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Chaitanya similarly rebuked Lord Krishna in loving exuberance. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was in the mood of the gopis and the student advocated the cause of Krishna, Lord Chaitanya was greatly angry. Seeing his anger, the foolish student, who was an ordinary atheistic smarta brahmana, foolishly misjudged him. Thus he and a party of students were ready to strike the Lord in retaliation. After this incident, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu decided to take sannyas so that people would not commit offenses against him, considering him an ordinary householder, for in India, even now, a sannyas is naturally offered respect. Chaitanya, text number 17251, and that should be up here. Baye palaya pudaya prabhu pache pachidaya aste vyaste bhakti bhaktagana prabhure radhaya Baye palaya paduya prabhu pache pachedaya Aste vyaste bhaktagana prabhure rahaya. So I'm going to go on and read the next couple of verses and then we'll start. Translation to that verse is, the student ran away in fear and the Lord followed him, but somehow or other the devotees checked the Lord. Prabhure santa kari anila nijakare Paduya palaya gela paduya sabhade. Translation. The devotees pacified the Lord and brought him home, and the student ran away to an assembly of other students. Text 253. Paduya sahasra yahan pade ekatani prabhura vrittanta dvija kahe tahan yai. Translation. The Brahmana student ran to a place where 1,000 students were studying together, and there he described the incident to them. Purport by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. In this verse, we find the word dvija indicating that the student was a Brahmana. Actually, in those days, only members of the Brahmana class became students of Vedic literature. Schooling is meant especially for Brahmanas. Previously, there was no question of schooling for Kshatriyas, who are soldiers or military men, Vaishyas, farmers or businessmen, or Sudras, laborers or artists. Kshatriyas used to learn the technology of warfare, and Vaishyas learned business from their fathers or other businessmen. They were not meant to study the Vedas, but at present, however, everyone goes to school, and everyone is given the same type of education, although no one knows what the result will be. The result, however, is mostly unsatisfactory, as we have seen in the Western countries especially. The United States has vast educational institutions where everyone is allowed to receive an education, but the result is that most students become like hippies. Higher education is not meant for everyone. Only selected individuals trained in Brahminical culture should be allowed to pursue a higher education. Educational institutions should not aim to teach technology, for a technologist cannot properly be called educated. A technologist is a Sudra. Only one who studies the Vedas may properly be called a learned man, Pandita. The duty of a Brahmana is to become learned in the Vedic literature and teach the Vedic knowledge to other Brahmanas. In our Krishna consciousness movement, we are simply teaching our students to become fit Brahmanas and Vaishnavas. In our school at Dallas, I'm not sure they do this all anymore, the students are learning English and Sanskrit, and through these two languages they are studying all our books such as Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and as it is, the Nectar Devotion. It is a mistake to educate every student as a technologist. There must be a group of students who become Brahmanas. Without Brahmanas who study the Vedic literature, human society will be entirely chaotic.
So that's an enormous amount of information that I will probably not be able to cover in this 40 minutes or 50 minutes, whatever. But as I read, I typically like to go back and get the context of the verse, so I go back to the beginning and try to get a sense for what's important. And for me, what stuck out was how important it was to know that Lord Caitanya was a teenager. He was kind of a youth, the ages. In the Bhagavatam, it talks about youth as being anywhere from 14, 15, 16, up into 24. And all of these pastimes in the 17th chapter happened when he was a youth, a little more than a teenager. We don't know exactly when, but he took sannyas at age of 24, so he did an enormous amount of manifesting as a young person. So there are too many pastimes in this chapter to try to summarize them all, but it's wonderful to hear that the Lord was so beautiful, physically. He was just so stunning. And he dressed in very fine clothing. He wore garlands and ornaments and smeared his body with sandalwood. And in those days, he must have been people would notice him in a crowd. He was just so incredibly handsome. And he was always dancing and chanting. And in this way, he inspired people to awaken their forgotten love for God. And then people would just automatically start chanting the holy name. So even as a youth, think of being 14, 15, 16, 17 even, how our teenagers, they struggle. But the Lord was a teacher at that age, and he was so learned that no scholar could defeat him. And he was quite proud of himself. Young people tend to be a little bit proud. And he didn't care what other people were saying. He just knew that what he was saying was authority, and he spoke fearlessly and defeated so many scholars. And during this time, he exhibited ecstatic love for Krishna, and because his behavior was a little bit mad, he kind of was so ecstatic, people really didn't understand his behavior. So he would tell people that he had some kind of air disorder. He had some kind of problem, and that made him behave that way, just so that they could relate to him. It was just so strange. I can't imagine, somebody rolling on the floor and crying all the time, and somebody emerging out of our community, what you would be wondering, do they need to go see a doctor or something? So it's interesting to note here, Prabhupada talks about how Krishna appears to grow from babyhood to childhood to boyhood to youth, but he never grows past youth. He's always the young, fresh personality, even physically. He looks young. And even on the Battle of Kurukshetra, when he was a grandfather, he had tons of grandchildren at home, and he was sufficiently of the age of being a grandfather, but he always looked like a 20 or 25-year-old person. And so just goes to show that despite his being in the material world, he is still always the eternal form of bliss and knowledge that's unborn and changeless. So during this time, when Lord Caitanya was a youth, he goes to Gaya, which is an ancient holy pilgrimage place for both Hindus and Buddhists. And while he was there, he met his spiritual master, Ishvara Puri, who he then took initiation from. And immediately after he took initiation, his love of God became so increased that he couldn't hide it, his love anymore. So they describe it as swoon in his ecstasy. And he just couldn't stop chanting and singing and glorifying Krishna, but in such a deep rapture that when he went home, he continued to display this mood. Whereas before he was kind of an impudent, sassy teacher, happy to challenge elders who were supposed to be very learned. But now when he comes home, he's totally absorbed in this mood of love. And very soon, he becomes really famous. People start to hear about this saint, / sage who is kind of mad with love. So people come out of curiosity, they come to get blessings, they come to get mercy. And his main activity was leading congregational chanting of the holy names in people's homes. And in this way, the Hare Krishna movement actually started. So basically, the message of Lord Caitanya is the same now as it was back then, just to give up all kinds of religious activities, which in those days and way before Lord Caitanya, they were very commonly practiced and very popular today, following lots of arduous rituals, typically, preferred, loved by the Hindu population. Just lots and lots of yagyas and rituals and various kinds of things. And the Lord, at the time that he appeared, he was openly preaching that people should give all this up, all these kinds of practices, yagyas and things up, and rather focus their energy on chanting the Lord's holy name and engaging their body and their mind and their words in ways that inspired themselves, but also inspired others to remember the Lord by hearing about him, talking about him, and particularly engaging themselves in assisting the Lord in his mission to reawaken the forgotten love for him. And this whole process we call devotional service, or the path of bhakti, because it's the process of connecting one's body, mind, words, possessions, relationships to the Lord. The word yoga means to connect or to link, to connect ourselves and all that we have and all that we are to the Lord in loving mood. And it's interesting when you think about how different religions have started. It's the same way that Jesus upset the temple rabbis. You know, when he started his mission and message, he started preaching, he really upset the temple rabbis and the priests that had big synagogues and temples. And he was just teaching people, give everything up, give all that up, and just love God. And in the same way, Caitanya upset the temple Brahmins by his radical message of love. Because often what happens is that the message of the religious founder gradually gets forgotten, and their followers get more focused on collecting money to maintain the organization's buildings than teaching others to love God. So if someone comes along and says, even today, but way back then also, that if someone comes along and says, hey, just love God, it's free for everyone. You don't need to go through a temple priest to earn God's love, just like Lord Caitanya did. He said, you just chant and dance, take prasadam, serve the Lord. That's the most direct way. But that's very threatening to any religious organization. And this is how Krishna continues to purify and transform religious organizations over time. That somebody shows up, and they have some inspiration. Krishna from within the heart says, wait a minute, we're kind of going off course. And they start to preach back to the original message so that people can come back to the simplicity and the profundity of the Lord's message. So just a little bit of history here is that during Lord Chaitanya's time, the Muslims had invaded India. I think they were occupying India for about 400 years. I think later than the British were there for 200 years or something. So the Muslims were in control of the country during the time of Lord Caitanya, and the Hindus that were living there had to kind of compromise a little bit with the Muslim authorities not to get in trouble with them. It was a bit of a sensitive dance. And they also had to pacify their Hindu neighbors because people were pretty accustomed to mundane religiosity. Hinduism was the way you live. Just like if you go to America, everybody will say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, but then they don't practice anything. They don't live like anything else, but it's just an identity. And so you had the same kind of mundane religiosity in India, and they used to complain about Lord Caitanya because they had never seen anything like that. And so when the Lord would sing in other people's homes, in devotees' homes, envious Brahmins who were supposed to be priests and lovers of God, they would try to insult the Lord in so many ways, and they would sometimes get some pretty harsh reactions. I'm thinking of one Brahmana, can't remember, it wasn't Gopala Chapala, it was another one, that he was very insulting to Lord Caitanya, who never takes offense, but he got such a reaction that he immediately got leprosy, and he had insects biting his oozing sores all over his body. It was a terrible, terrible curse, but sometimes that happens if you're too offensive to the Lord. It's not that the Lord takes offense, but somehow you get a pretty bad karma like this guy did. In the end, Lord Caitanya is merciful to him, and he relieves him of this terrible suffering. But sometimes ordinary students of the Vedas who are not devotees of the Lord, they would come and see the Lord out of curiosity. They didn't really understand. They heard about him, that he was rolling around, having these ecstasies, crying a lot, and there's no internet and TV. Well, gosh, if you hear something fantastic happening in another town, you're going to go see a spectacle. And so you had all these students at other little learning, I don't know if they were universities or what they called them then, but they came just to listen and to see what was this strange person doing. But because they didn't really have faith, they made up their own concocted interpretation of what they thought they heard the Lord talking about. And they would say, well, the holy name that Caitanya is chanting is some kind of exaggerated form of prayer. And when the Lord heard that interpretation, he became very angry, because that's not exactly what the holy name is some exaggerated form of prayer. It's like every other prayer. It's just that the Hare Krishna or the Vaishnavas at that time had just become very emotional. So he became very angry, and he warned people to avoid them. He warned his devotees to avoid these students. So even we see today, even though you have in the Lord Chaitanya's time, you had pious and very religious Hindus complaining, and that Lord Caitanya had somehow broken the Hindu religious principles, that he was dangerous, that he was keeping these night-long vigils of singing, and they didn't mind that because you could do that with demigods and gods and goddesses. You could do these kinds of worship rituals. But they complained that the Lord Chaitanya's chanting and dancing was hurting their ears. It was keeping them up all night. It was disturbing the neighborhood. And, they weren't used to that kind of thing in their temples. And I've heard these kind of complaints today by other Orthodox Hindus who come to our temple thinking we are a Hindu temple, and they are frustrated because of the loud cymbals and chanting and dancing. They think that's very extreme. I've heard them say that when you come to the temple, it should be more soothing, like Indian classical music and hymn singing, and that it's just too loud, this chanting, and too agitating to their peace of mind. So they kind of don't really get the message that the loud chanting of the holy name is an outgrowth of the joy that a person feels when they experience love of God. It's a different movement, and that's why I know people identify us, the Hare Krishna movement, as a Hindu denomination, but the reality is Lord Caitanya was a reformer, and his whole mission was to reform Hinduism and bring it back to its original essential message, which is just to develop love of God by hearing and chanting and singing and celebrating in joy. So, again, like then, you get some criticism that somehow or other Prabhupada has spoiled Hindu Dharma by teaching these mlechas and yavanas, these Westerners who haven't been born in Hindu families. They aren't really qualified to take up this path of Dharma. And Srila Prabhupada points back to what happened in Lord Chaitanya's time, that, the love of God is free for everyone, and everybody can take part Even a dog can take part. So one of the things that the Hindu priests or the Brahmanas were worried about was that Navadvip, the place where Lord Caitanya appeared and was doing his preaching, they were afraid that people wouldn't come anymore. It was known as a education hub, like if you go to, I don't know, in America, I don't know what it would be here, but in America you have, Princeton and Harvard and Duke and there's a whole community of educators that gather around that. But in those days, Navadvip was considered a place where learned people would come and teach and learn. But they were afraid if people took to the Lord Chaitanya's movement in the way that he presented it, they wouldn't come to study anymore. They would not, if they don't come to study, then they won't come and bring their commerce. They won't have then the money that they need to support their institutions. And it was very threatening. I think it's probably pretty threatening too today, when you have people saying that the highest knowledge is to practice bhakti yoga, and we don't need to go to get a PhD in a university. I mean, that's kind of threatening because, as we know, many education organizations are simply a business, and somehow making people feel that unless you have a university degree that you can't make money, and so people jump those hoops. So we can be very threatening as a movement, and it's just really important to hearken back to our history to feel comforted that if you're causing ripples, if you're disturbing society in some way, not intentionally, certainly that's not our business, is to try to freak people out. But if people are upset because we glorify God, then we're in good company, because the whole lineage of the Parampara, that was their whole movement, is to reawaken people's love. And sometimes people get upset about that. So I want to go forward a little bit. So let's go back to today's verse. So one day, while Lord Caitanya was sitting in someone's home, he was feeling a deep longing in his heart for his gopi friends. The gopis, for those of you who don't know what a gopi is, gopis and gopas, they were Krishna's dearest cowherd boy and girlfriends when he appeared in the holy land of Vrindavan 5,000 years ago. And he loved them so very much that they were his dearest love, next to Srimati Radharani, who is Krishna's transcendental girlfriend and consort. And because Lord Chaitanya is none different than Lord Krishna in Vrindavan Krishna, at this moment his heart felt so much yearning. You can only compare it to if you're missing a dear friend. We all have friends or family members who we love, and perhaps they are gone, maybe they have died, or maybe they have gone to another country, and we miss them dearly. So if we can multiply that 100 times, Lord Chaitanya was in this mood of feeling separation from his dear friends and loved ones, the gopis. And he started to swoon, I can't imagine what it would be like. He was just sort of aching, totally oblivious of everything around him. And he was crying out, "Gopi, Gopi," trying to connect. And so the students that had come from this mundane education institution, I don't know what it was called, but there were thousands of students who were studying there. So he came and he saw Lord Chaitanya calling out, "Gopi, Gopi." And in this ecstatic mood, he was horrified that the Lord was chanting Gopi instead of the holy name of Krishna. So he yelled at the Lord. Can't imagine being so audacious. He yelled at the Lord, "Why are you chanting the names Gopi, Gopi instead of the holy name of Lord Krishna, which is so glorious? What pious result will you achieve by chanting?" And so when Lord Chaitanya heard this, he became very angry, not because he felt insulted by him, but because he totally misunderstood his mood of love and ecstasy. And, he rebuked Lord Krishna in various ways. Taking up a stick, he rose to strike the student. So this is a very esoteric pastime where Lord Caitanya is in this mood of Krishna, Vrindavan Krishna, in separation from the gopis, and apparently in this pastime, Uddhava, who is a kind of, he's also a counselor, very close friend of Krishna, maybe a cousin even, he came with a message for the gopis, and I don't know what that message is. It doesn't talk about it in this story, but he becomes resonant with the gopis and feeling separation for Krishna. And in every loving exchange, if you don't know the subtle dealings between a lover and a beloved, you're going to be confused by being angry at the beloved. You may or may not have had a relationship with someone in the material world where you love them very much and they don't come or they don't give you attention. So now you're feeling angry. But underneath the anger is really grief. That's really what the anger is. So the anger is a secondary emotion, and Lord Caitanya is underneath that with the gopis was feeling a sense of grief and separation, but it expressed itself as anger. So this mundane student who didn't have any entrance into the loving exchanges between, what to speak of the Lord and his pure devotees, he didn't clearly understand loving exchanges between even probably mundane people. So he couldn't understand it, and therefore he was so offensive. And Lord Caitanya, he was angry not at him, but because he totally missed the mood. He didn't capture it. So Prabhupada says in the purport to this verse that in Srimad Bhagavatam, when Uddhava came from Lord Krishna with a message for the gopis, all the gopis, especially Srimati Radharani, denounced Krishna in various ways. Such denunciations, however, reflect an exuberant, loving attitude that an ordinary man cannot understand. And I think we are pretty close to being ordinary, but we have one, if you have any experience in loving relationships, you might have a little pinch of understanding of what the Lord was experiencing, but not completely. So when the foolish student questioned Lord Chaitanya's rebuking Lord Krishna in loving exuberance, the Lord became angry because he realized that the student, he thought that what Lord Caitanya was doing was trying to acquire pious credits. And that's very much a part of Hinduism and mundane religiosity. You see this in Buddhism as well, where people, they try to earn God's love by doing this and that and giving money in charity, or they do pay a pujari or a temple priest to pay them to do some ritual to clear them of some sinful activity. That's not what Lord Caitanya was doing, and that's not what we're doing when we chant the holy name. We're not trying to get anything from Krishna. What we're doing when we praise the Lord in dance and song is we're saying thank you. We're so grateful for what we've already been given. It's not about earning anything or even trying to purify ourselves. It's just an expression of our love. So sometimes when Prabhupada was on the planet, he would chastise us. I mean, I saw with my own eyes many times, Prabhupada would really become angry at a disciple. And none of us, when we were chastised by Prabhupada, we never felt insulted. It was such a weird thing, because anybody else who would have yelled at us or tried to teach us something, our egos would get disturbed and we would become defensive. But when Prabhupada would chastise us, we understood that he did that out of love. We recognized him as our teacher. We understood the corrections. We came to be a student. If you're learning the piano and the teacher says, not that way, do it this way, you're grateful because you really want to become a master of music or piano. But same thing with spiritual life. If the master will say, no, not that way, do it this way, this is the proper way to do it, then same thing. We should feel grateful. Instead of looking for a teacher to massage our false ego, which often is the case in public educational institutions. The students come, they want to be flattered, they can't bear to fail, and so you have this very impure, almost toxic relationship between teacher and student, where the teacher cannot say or speak the truth to the student that, you're really proud, you need to humble yourself. That's not the right way, because the student will go away, just like this student in this story of Lord Caitanya. They will become insulted, they will misunderstand that this is actually love, to speak the truth even though it hurts. And so this is what happened. The student went away after witnessing Lord Caitanya's ecstasy. He goes to this assembly. I don't know if they were meeting outside under a tree, but there were 1,000 other students studying together, and he told them this story. He was very angry after he saw Lord Caitanya, and Lord Caitanya threatened to hit him with a stick. And so he goes home and he tells these other students what happened, and the Lord also started to try to follow the student, either to try to hit him or even to try to help him understand. I don't know the mind of the Lord in that case. If I were in the Lord's place and I saw that a student had misunderstood me and had run away because they were angry, my mood would be that I would follow them and sit them down and try to explain to them what just happened. I am a teacher in many ways in my work. And that, in my view, is the responsibility of the teacher. If the student doesn't understand, wait a minute, let's talk about that. But anyway, the Lord was upset. He was in ecstasy. And his devotee said, calm down, don't go, don't follow this student. So then the student, he caused a big commotion and pit a whole lot of other students against Lord Caitanya. So that's the end of those verses, but just to know, in the coming days, you're going to hear what happened next in more detail by whoever is giving class, and sadly, you only get to hear Caitanya Caritamrita on the weekend, so there's a big gap. If you didn't hear last weekend, you're going to miss what happened and the run of the story. But just to give you a little glimpse, what really happens is that this Smarta Brahmana who ran away from the Lord, who wanted to hit him, he went to this assembly, told them what happened. They started criticizing the Lord in so many ways, and because of their offensive mentality, even though they were so educated, they lost all spiritual intelligence. Even though they had mundane knowledge, they had all the philosophy right, and they lost their spiritual sense. They laughed and joked about the Lord in ways that were criticizing him. And because the Lord is all-knowing, he knew this was happening. Even though they were far away, he knew that they were all criticizing him. And he understood that their criticism was a symptom of how degraded their consciousness had become. And in fact, when we develop a critical, offensive mentality, it's really it's a symptom. Being a critical person, if you're always criticizing everyone, that's a symptom of your offensive mentality. Because a person who has love and compassion, they're very generous with forgiveness and understanding. We're all human beings, we're fallible people, and if I'm not perfect, I can't expect others to be perfect either. But instead of being forgiving or trying to understand why Lord Caitanya was upset, they simply criticized him. And Lord Caitanya was not offended And so he started to think, when he realized in meditation that they were criticizing him, he thought, oh, this is not good for them, that they're criticizing me in this way. They're destroying their spiritual life. How can I rescue them from their degraded mentality? And so after thinking for a long time, the Lord, he had an idea that if he could get somehow the students to offer him obeisances, all their reactions to their sinful activities would be nullified. And so then from there, he can inspire them to take up the process of devotional service. And so then the Lord realized that the only way he could trick people into offering him their obeisances was for him to take the renounced sort of life. And that's why he very soon took sannyas, because he thought that was the only way we could get people who are so deluded to offer even a pinch of respect, to have a position that in India, in that culture, is very much respected. I'm going to stop here, aware that we have about 10 minutes, and I'm wondering if you're still awake in the class, and you're still listening. If you have any reflections or insights that came up, yeah. I'd love to hear and engage in some growth-fostering kata. Maybe you can enlighten me as well.
Thanks for your class. From one aspect, we could conclude that because of the way the students acted, Lord Caitanya said, I'll take sannyas, like it hadn't occurred to him before, perhaps. That's one reading we could take. In the Puranas, there are many verses which predict that Krishna will appear in Kali Yuga and take the renounced form of life. So perhaps Lord Caitanya made this whole arrangement as a pretext to take sannyas.
Yeah, good insight.
That's perhaps one angle of vision.
Yeah, well, sure. Well, we also even know, I'm not an astrologer, but people who do astrology know what, you can see what is likely to happen. Doesn't mean it'll necessarily happen, but it makes sense that there would be some prediction there, yeah. Yeah.
There was actually when Lord Chaitanya's maternal grandfather, who was a great astrologer, and I'm just trying to remember. Sorry? Nilambara Chakravarti, thank you. Yes, when he did the astrological chart for Mahaprabhu, he saw that. But he didn't mention it to the parents because he knew they would be heartbroken if they knew their son was going to follow his older brother into the renounced. That is mentioned somewhere.
Okay. Well, just like the astrologer also predicted that Prabhupada would come to the West. I mean, you can see those kinds of things, especially in a great soul. It's just like, boing, yeah, understandable. Yeah. Any other thoughts, insights, reflections, wisdom to share? Yeah. Oh, good.
And the temple where it's his birthplace, how you're mentioning about the kirtans being too loud and how people, you would think that there would be kirtan. It's Lord Nityananda's birthplace.
Yeah.
The deities are behind glass.
Oh my.
It's like a museum, and it says, "Do not make any noise."
Oh my.
And I was like, wow, you're in Lord Nityananda's birthplace and there's no kirtan going on. It's very odd.
Wow.
But our temple, the ISKCON temple, is right next to it, and there's kirtan going on.
Make a lot of noise. Well, that's a thing, you know. People don't understand, because it seems like for someone who worships, or their practice is silent meditation, and they're in that kind of mood, this sounds like really clanging rock music or something. But they don't get it that, okay, when you get to the heart of the matter, you're overflowing with so much love you can't contain yourself. So you're jumping around. What to do about that? And it's not just our tradition. You can study other traditions who have that, you know, mystical tradition like Sufism. Their whole practice is dancing and singing. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Behind glass doors. Ooh. Give us some wisdom. Chamri, give us some wisdom. Nothing. You got nothing. Anything else? You back there, do you have a question? All right. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.